The Princess and the Pilot, Madhouse and TMS, they are co-producing this film. We have Jun Shishido as the director who had worked on the Hajime no Ippo series beforehand, and with a character designer who looks to have a prior history in Gainax, as well as working on a couple pretty acclaimed series like Monte Cristo or In the Corner of the World. Now what surprised me is that there was actually some great CGI within this movie. It's not a skill you tend to see from Madhouse. I mean, it's generally seamless. In fact, the first time I watched the film, I didn't even know if it was CGI. Except for this one shot here with the chrome fan. I mean, why are you here? Now, as most people who are beaten up on the floor and mugged, you look into sky for some aspiration. Charles here, when at his lowest, he sees what rises in front of him. When there is nothing left, have you considered joining the army? This is a war and love story about a forbidden romance in the tatters of war, with a bit of a swashbuckling kind of premise. A woman stuck in an arranged marriage for political reasons, being flown to her protection from mercenaries. There's a lot of fantastical elements here, in fact from a western flavour as well, but with the caveat that it's all set in this sort of World War II style aesthetic, down to the planes that play such a pivotal role within the movie. Although it is fair to say that the main character Charles is painted slightly different, as a street rat. You could definitely say there's a dash of Macross here as well, but set in a fantasy world. Sometimes the backgrounds are really nice here in the setting, it can be crisp, it can be clean, with some really striking vistas. It also features quite a western style orchestra of classic proportions, but I've got to say absolutely the highlight of the movie overall is the plane sequences, which are nice. And that is the main priority of the film, so it leads to its strengths at least. Though the core of the story tends to be the relationship between the pilot and this princess in question, who's very timid. Somehow their situation gets worse and worse as it goes. She loses all her stuff very quickly. The facet of it becomes a tense undercover story. For Charles, this is a one-time opportunity, but things start to twist as they go, in ways that are a little bit strange. Say for example how these two individuals on different sides of the aisles happen to have met each other in the past, when they were children, multiple times in fact. And I was actually very worried when this happened because I thought it was going to fall into a very contrived amnesia type style where they were best friends or, I don't know, perhaps like they were, you know, first crushes from an age before. Though it never goes quite that far, although some of it is a little bit questionable when it comes to the pilot's mother especially. But we gotta say, this sequence here, this is cool as hell. As they slice through, it gets dramatic, the bleeding shot up. It knows how to really play with the tension in a both animation, set piece, and musical fashion. We've already set up that these planes are the suicide-worthy situation, almost like there's no way out of it. It's a nightmare come true. Although somehow, just somehow, by the skin of their teeth, they are able to escape through other situations. As the sun rises and the clouds fall, we get to have that satisfying moment as the characters come together closer in their battered state. Please really help to emphasise that little ending, including the little song that features towards the end. Now the core of that relationship here, between Fana and the pilot, is the montage. Their relationship goes from a sort of cold awkwardness to a fun enjoyment between watching these characters interact. Though my issue is perhaps that I don't think these characters are particularly strong or well defined. Charles is quiet and soft spoken. He understands the game he has to play even though he doesn't like it, but he approaches everything with a stiff upper lip, while the princess herself is quiet and meek, even though she has a kind streak in her. Although the problem is that she kind of falls into a very stereotype where all she can seem to do is talk about how useless she is. Without many aspirations of her own to sort of go into, she feels more like a plot device at times than an actual character, going through the beats that you would expect in a story like this. She's very self-centered around her own world and the way that she looks at things, and this happens multiple times through the story. And I understand, like, she's a literal princess, right? The world revolves around her. The drunkard princess is a cool moment, especially since it brings a little bit of a dynamic to their relationship, which is generally quite set. You have a couple of fun moments in there and cliche points you expect. Oh yes, that seems I have fell on you, which describes a lot of the movie in general. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but there is a line you have to walk. Although at least they never go through some sort of weird divide between these characters for arbitrary reasons of an argument. Now the second set piece is even more defined in its structure. It kind of sets the mood of these things. You know, we start with like a surprise flank into a near escape, and then a final confrontation between another pilot. Very swashbuckling.
私の勝ちだ。
It's hard not to see why these characters would fall into such a strong relationship with each other when they're in such beautiful vistas and the deep blue skies, that they generally do work together in a really effective fashion to get past those final little obstacles. And there's something to be said about Charles' admiration for being a pilot in the open air, the freedom that it can exhibit. It almost reminds me of some stuff that they say in Moby Dick. When I go to sea, I go as a simple sailor, right before the mast, plumb down into the forecast. Aloft there is to a royal masthead. What of it if some old hunk of sea captain orders me to get a broom and sweep down their decks? What does that indignity amount to, Wade? I mean, in a scale of the New Testament, do you think Archangel Gabriel thinks anything less of me because I promptly and respectfully obeyed that old hunk in that particular instance? Who ain't a slave? Tell me that. Again, I always go to sea as a sailor because they make a point of paying me for my trouble, whereas they never pay a passenger a single penny. The romance is a little undercooked, I will say that much. It's that Princess and the Pauper story with the flashbacks that are a bit shoehorned in. I could have done with something else, a little more padding on it, a little more things to make it unique. I was kind of expecting a curveball towards the end because that's how these stories tend to go. But I actually had a lot more questions by the end. I was shocked by how straightforward the story became. It's not like I didn't have fun. Those CGI planes really work wonders. I do feel like there's something missing though. Some elements that are dropped, like the prince's incompetence, that never are extended upon. There's never much extended on the corruption or scummy behaviour, or the term bastardo, which the film doesn't quite explain, but if you look at the light novel, it actually says that this was a term, a derogatory term, in that of mixed blood from both warring countries, which adds another layer of oppression and compliance to Charles. He's definitely a second-class war slave, given a ticket to freedom, and to really highlight some of that stuff that makes me not feel quite right about it, I need to talk about the narrative from a different perspective.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me.
This is just Shrek in anime form. Structurally, both of these are missions that men have never really asked to be put on to return to a peaceful life or even gain one. In this corner we have the working class / racial elements that have been put in, which sort of complement this way an ogre was treated in terms of the story of Shrek as sort of more of a second class citizen. All mythical creatures that they are kind of turned into refugees. Now, Shrek plays with Hollywood traditions of like hating before you're mating, if you catch my drift. You know, how Fiona expects a dashing prince but instead gets the complete opposite, and a lot of the film is her trying to come to terms with that realization of reality versus fantasy. Playing with the fantasy tropes was part of the fun of it, especially since this is how DreamWorks even began, but you still get that happily ever after. The key difference seen here is the bittersweetness. Shrek's fairy tale approach involves love conquers all, even when it seems impossible at first, while the princess in comparison comes together with a pretty stay in your lane sensibility. You can maybe say that's a Japanese perspective. The pauper has no way to be with the princess, this is just not what's going to happen, and the pilot accepts that from the beginning. He's very unwavering in that, never even like thinking about it for a second, even when given the option otherwise, perhaps because he understands the reality of his situation. The part that doesn't ring right with me involves, let's say, class. The main character being forced down by both his class and blood by everyone in front of him. It's used as a major talking point during the ending, that this job is an escape from that life of being a mercenary and having to be forced to kill people. Even if you can't have the valor while doing it, or the credit, it's spending the rest of your life in leisure would probably be reward enough. I mean, this is a man who can't even sleep properly because of his terrible flashbacks to near-death skirmishes in the past. Oh, and he also mentions about, how he gets to save a life instead of take one, which kind of brings to his more sentimental side. One problem though, I see that like in the princess's final goodbye, she seems to be goading the pilot to prove that he didn't do it for the money, or that he should totally come even though it's putting his life or his position in jeopardy. And there's a difference in dialogue from the novel and here, which I think is quite alarming, because in the movie version he kind of tries to play that he's just like every other mercenary. He's playing like a character that he's doing a very bad job of. Yet in the actual novel, his final saying is effectively like, what, do you not want me to remove myself from a life of mercenary? Like, this money is my only way of doing that, which is a pretty strong counterpoint to what the princess is trying to say. Then in sort of a surprise turn, he flies his plane above the blimp. He spreads his reward like ashes to the wind. Charles had no interest in the value of the surface, because he lived above it. To him, gold was simply an ornament of the sky. The visual novel also clarifies that he threw it all the way. Of course, that is a pretty strong power play and a Chad move, you could say, but one that rejects his class interests and dooms him to a continued life of no-name mercenary, forced to kill forevermore, now without the backing of the military, which then reminds me of a Terry Pratchett quote about the cost of poverty. Take Boots, for example. If he earned $38 a month plus allowance, a really good pair of level boots cost $50. But an affordable pair of boots, which were sort of okay for a season or two, that leaked like hell when the cardboard gave out, cost about $10. Those were the kind of boots that Vimmies always bought and wore until the soles were so thin that he could tell where he was in the foggy night by the feel of the cobbles. But the thing was that good boots lasted for years and years. A man who could afford $50 had a pair of boots that could still be keeping his feet dry for 10 years' time, while the poor man who could only afford cheap boots would have spent $100 on boots in the same time and would still have wet feet. Now we have to apply this to planes and machinery, but instead of wet boots we're talking about faltering engines that hopefully don't kill you in a skirmish. Charles will likely die of dysentery on some island while nursing a new collection of gunshot wounds. Listen, this kind of works like in a fairy tale romance sense. You know, the mysterious cool pilot goes into the sunset never to be seen again, but you film and book, you're the ones that brought this up, okay? Not me, it was you. The end of the visual novel even brings attention to it, you know? Were the two of them able to meet again, or were they forever apart and able to overcome the barriers of their social class? I do not have every answer the reader desires. This isn't class commentary. This is all edge and no point. If you refuse to go past the rich people beating up children stuff, it's not great. Or perhaps a system where the poorest fight relentless wars only to benefit people like the princess, who, if she's against it or not, many men have died to get her where she was. But really then when you get down to it, this is a princess who's had a whole underclass family give their entire efforts to her just for her own comfort, and she doesn't understand the consequences of what that means. While she was a child, that's hard to understand, that's not really on her, but as a grown woman, I mean, come on, you're about to be queen, where even her touch almost gets him killed when she's about to get picked up by the blimp. She's always putting him in dire situations, like trying to convince him to run off with her penniless. Eventually they're going to get caught and her beloved pilot is going to be court-martialed for treason, then she's going to go marry the prince who almost got them killed with his basic lack of understanding. How can you have that many medals and not understand that radio signals are not safe from the empire you are running away from?
Oh no, I've gone cross-eyed.
Oh fuck you, Mike Myers, get out of here! I knew bringing you up was a bad idea.
Oh yeah! Oh yeah! Oh yeah! Oh yeah! Oh yeah!
So yeah, it's pretty alright. You probably want to check it out if you like these kind of films. Alright, I guess my cat is here to thank my patrons. Is that right? Alright, that's Alex Morotti, Daniel Strait, and Joven. Yeah, there you go. Thank you for all the support, I guess.